Welcome to Dead Good Book Reviews, I'm Judith, and today I'm bringing you my December wrap. December should have been a really good reading month for me. It ended up being okay. I read 14 books in December. As you know, in 2020, I'm shooting to read 16, 17 books a month, so this was, fairly close. I had a few books on here, and you'll see them in the coming list, that just sort of sent me a little bit slumpwards, so I'm not really sure what happened there. There were some really good books on this list, and I'm excited to share them with you. First up, I have Nottingham by Nathan McCarrick. I don't have the dust jacket for this. It's somewhere in the house. I'm not 100% sure where. This came out from Forge in September of 2019. This is a Robin Hood retelling, or reimagining. It was interesting. This book focuses in on the idea of legend and story and where the story of Robin Hood came from, because obviously we don't really know. What I liked about this book was that it all felt very plausible. It felt like an actual series of events that could have happened that then led to us having the Robin Hood story as we know it today. It's multiple POV, which I thought was a really smart choice. It includes several different characters' perspective, including more than one woman. It's not just Marion. I thought that helped give a more holistic idea of the story of what was happening, and it really tied into that idea of there being so many perspectives on a story that then leads to the final product. Unfortunately, I didn't really enjoy reading this book. It all felt a bit too dense, a bit too heavy. I felt you could have stripped things back and it would have been much better. You get like 100 pages in, they're still in the Crusades. I just could have done with it being a little bit tighter, which, given that it was written from a screenplay, surprised me, because you'd think it would have started being very pared back. I don't know. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Next, I read The Chosen by Taran Matharu. This comes out on the 9th of January from Hachette. This book follows a main character called Cade, who starts the book in a juvenile correction facility. Him and the boys from the facility end up being transported to this kind of other realm where a lot of different lost things, taken things are, and they have to work out what's going on while at the same time surviving. This is a really great, fast-paced read if you like this kind of YA. If this sort of story isn't for you, this isn't gonna change your mind. It has dinosaurs, it has Romans, it's pretty good fun, there's a lot of different variety in there. It really feels like the first book in a series. There's a lot of different loose ends left by the end of the book, and it's not the most focused on what I would have liked to focus on, which is the plot, and more focused on we've got to introduce all of these characters. This wasn't a book for me, but I would recommend it. If you like the concept, you'll probably have a good time reading it. I gave this 3 stars. Next, I read The Toll by Neil Shusterman. This is book 3 in the Arc of a Scythe series. So we've had Scythe, Thunderhead, and now The Toll. This came out from Walker in December of last year. What I really like about these books is how far we've come from book 1. Book 1, Scythe, is really just about 2 characters, about Rowan and Sidra, and the difference in their lives and their romance, and it's all a bit of a faff. By this book, that's almost completely out of the window. They're still there and they're still heavily featured, probably too much, but it's more about kind of morality and death and what it is to be human and AI, and it's just, oh, it's so good. Everything about this book is amazing except for the end, and I will go to the grave on that. It's just wonderful world building, really. The whole series is just fabulous world building. I would definitely recommend reading these if you haven't picked them up yet. I gave The Toll 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Skyward series. So the first book was Skyward, this is Starsight. I wasn't sure what to expect with this book. I didn't know where the plot would go. It went wildly further than I expected it to. So in this book, the main character, Citra, is infiltrating aliens. This really reminded me a bit of Aurora Rising. Not in the writing style, but in that kind of have to form a group of people to fly in a spacecraft together, that kind of thing. Really, really enjoyed this. I'm definitely ready for book 3. Please give it to me immediately. I don't like waiting for these. It's interesting, this very much felt like a piece of a series rather than a book in its own right, which I haven't found with other Brandon Sanderson books I've read. Probably because most of the ones I've read, with the exception of the first Mistborn book, have been standalone books. So maybe it's just that I haven't read enough Brandon Sanderson series, but the ending of this is an intense cliffhanger, and now we're all stranded waiting. Join my support group for Brandon Sanderson readers. We can have jackets. Next, I read The Night Country by Melissa Albert. This is out from Penguin Random House on the 9th of January. This is the sequel to The Hazelwood, which I don't think I have anymore. Oh, it's over here, just to have something to waft at you. It's a sequel to The Hazelwood. I will say, I think it's worth rereading The Hazelwood before you read this. I didn't, and I kind of regretted it. They are very different stories, but they feature most of the same characters, so it's definitely worth recapping at least the first book. This felt very much like a thriller crossed with a fantasy. Somebody's murdering. In the real world, somebody's killing these storybook characters, and Alice, our main character, who was also the main character in The Hazelwood, is involved somehow, possibly being framed, and it's kind of a whodunit versus fantasy world travelling. It does a lot, and I think that's why I didn't like this book as much as The Hazelwood, because while I liked elements of this book a lot more, it just isn't as cohesive, and you get very jumbled up in what you're reading. I ended up giving this 4 stars, just shy of the 5. I really liked the writing. Melissa Albert's writing is absolutely beautiful. I just wasn't 100% sold on the kind of book as a whole. Next, I read Fate of the Fallen by Calcade. This came out at the end of the year from Tor. This is the story of a forester called Aslo, A-A-S-L-O, Aslo, who basically takes up the mantle of his friend Matthias, who is the chosen one of prophecy, when his friend Matthias is killed right at the beginning. It's kind of funny. Like, this very much could be the setup for a funny book. This book is not funny. This book really annoyed me. It's so short, and it took me about 2 weeks to read because I just couldn't get into it at all. And I was really frustrated because there were so many parts of it that should have been really good. I loved this idea of Aslo being, of the main character being a forester, and this idea that they're quite revered because they keep everyone safe and they keep the forest alive, so there's lumber for everyone, and they just didn't go into any of that. It was like, well, you're a forester, now some people will mention that you're a forester, but we're not going to tell you what that really is, that was what I was interesting. I want gardening. Give me gardening. I ended up giving it 2 stars because I really liked the concept, and I thought that some of the characterization of some of the side characters was really good, but the book as a whole I would not recommend. Next, I finished the audiobook of Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the 2nd book in the Farseer trilogy. I'm now on the 3rd one because I've just jumped straight through audiobook. I'm really enjoying these. This was originally published in 1996, so I'm trying to include some older fantasy, but the best way to do that is through audiobook because often they're these kind of really chunky tomes. Maybe I'll do Wheel of Time, maybe, I haven't decided. But no, anyway, back to Royal Assassin. I loved this book. I thought it was so good. I'm really obsessed with this series so far. I'm kind of in that awkward fuzzy stage where book 2 and book 3 are blurring a little bit for me, so I need to keep my head straight and only talk about book 2. I thought Fitz was less annoying in this book. He's still quite annoying and Molly deserves better, but Fitz was less annoying. I thought that the villain characters were a bit more nuanced. A lot of stuff happened that just made me very sad, and fewer dogs died, which was my aim. I just want all the dogs to live. If you haven't checked out this series, I really recommend doing it, and I also recommend looking up the audiobooks because I just think they're wonderfully narrated. I gave this 5 stars. Next, I finished The Shadow Saint by Gareth Hanrahan. This is a little bit of a battered copy now. This is from Orbit. This comes out on the 9th of January 2020. This is the 2nd book in the Black Iron Legacy. What's fun about this, I don't have it with me, it's somewhere in another room. They sent through like a little RPG that you could play to be in the universe. Such a cute touch, really, really adorable, and possibly maybe something to persuade Justina I should read that and Asha from Cat Book and a Cup of Tea to play with me, and we could film it, and it would be an entertaining video, except it would probably just be us cackling. This is The Shadow Saint. I really enjoyed this. I liked it a little bit less than book 1. I think it felt not quite as rich as book 1 did, The Gutter Prayer I should say, but it's still so good. You follow the story of Elidora, who was a character in the 1st book, and she's become a political aide. She's an assistant to a guy running for government, and there's an election happening in this. If you like politics and fantasy, this is definitely one to seek out, but it's not boring politics, and there's plenty of action as well. I would highly recommend this series. This is one of my favourite currently publishing series that there is out there, and I'm desperate for book 3. I think there might be 5 books coming, which is just phenomenal. I ended up giving this 4 stars just because it didn't quite hit me the same as Gutter Prayer, but it's still really, really good. Next, I finally finished the first 4 books in the Earthsea series by Ursula Le Guin. This has been sat on my TBR since June because I just didn't want to take it off my shelf, but I wasn't really wanting to read it. I wasn't motivated to read it, but this holiday I went, nope, I'm not going into 2020 with this on my TBR. It is gone, it is off, goodbye, good riddance. No, I know people really love these books, and I've got a lot of friends who are huge fans of them, but for me, this just didn't do it for me. I thought they were boring. They were boring for me. I couldn't work out where the threads of the story were going. It all felt very smushed together. Maybe if you read them as 4 separate books, it would be very different, but I did split up at least book 1 and 2, and I still felt kind of lost, and I didn't really care about any of the characters. I will say there are some moments where her writing is absolutely beautiful and her sentence structure is really interesting, but this book just didn't do it for me, and I'm quite glad to not have to read any more. Beyond the Shadowed Earth by Joanna Ruth Mayer. This comes out from Page Street Publishing on the 14th of January. So in this, the main character Ada is an empress, and she's basically got her position by making a bit of a dodgy deal with some gods, and this book is really her dealing with the consequences of that, trying to save her best friend, going on a journey. There's some men involved. I didn't really get on with this book. I read it while I was on holiday and it was just a bit meh for me. I liked the idea of it. I liked some of the bits of writing, some of the story elements, some of the characters, but Ada as a main character was just super annoying. I'm not averse to a main character who makes bad decisions because I think that fuels the book, but If a character makes a decision that is clearly the most ridiculous decision, I want to know why they made that choice, when to you as a reader you're just like, well, of course that's a stupid idea. Yes, look, this blew up in your face, you deserved this entirely. And with this book I didn't get that. I didn't feel like I knew why she was making these choices, and thus I was just annoyed at her the whole time. I ended up giving this 2 stars. It was maybe 2.5 at a push, but it just wasn't for me. Next, I read The Iron Will of Genie Lo by FCE. This comes out also on the 14th of January, but from Abrams. This book started with a disclaimer from the author about how busy they'd been, and I was a bit kind of trepidatious because any book that starts with an apology / explanation is usually not that great, but I did actually really enjoy this book. It didn't hit quite so hard as Epic Crush of Genie Lo did. It's very much kind of a book looking at how the events of book 1 would really impact someone and how these things would actually work, which isn't always the most entertaining thing in fantasy fiction, but it was okay. I thought it was quite good. The plot got a little bit lost as it went on. I still had a really good time reading this, and I think for some people they're going to be really, really good books, and I think it's an interesting approach to a second book in a series and the end to a duology. This was a solid 3-star read for me, right bang in the middle. Alright, but not amazing. Next, I read HighFive by Owen Colfer. This comes out from Quercus Books on the 28th of January. This is Owen Colfer's foray into adult fiction. I don't know if he's written any other adult fiction before, but this is his latest. In this book, it's set in New Orleans, and a young boy who's a bit of a delinquent called Squib ends up working, through a series of events, ends up working for the last remaining dragon, which honestly sounds like it could be a middle grade book plot, does it not? But add in a lot of drugs, murder, swearing, lust, and very, very terrible villains, and you've got an adult book. I quite enjoyed reading this. I thought it was quite a fun read. It didn't take itself too seriously for all of the dark topics that it took on. It didn't feel like an insensitive writing of New Orleans. There have been some of those in the past. I thought this was quite good fun. I don't think I'd recommend it to the kind of people who read what I like to read. It was very different from what I tend to recommend. I also gave this 3 stars. It was another firm 3-star read. Not amazing, but not terrible. Next, I read A Throne of Swans by Catherine and Elizabeth Kaur. This comes out from Hotkey Books on the 9th of January. A lot of things coming out on the 9th and 14th of January. It's going to be a busy week for everyone that week. This is a very, very classic, very, very tropey YA book, and I actually really love it for that reason. I thought it was an entertaining read if you like that kind of story. In this case, the power that our main character has lost is the ability to shapeshift into a swan, and she ends up in court having to hide the fact that she can't fly anymore. It's very, very plot twisty, love triangle adjacent things happen, and in this case you have a character making bad decisions, but it's quite clear why she's doing it, and it's set up why she as a character would make those choices, so I didn't mind it too much. I also gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Thinking about it now, it's probably more of like a 3.5 to 4. I don't think it's one for everyone, and if you go in expecting to have your socks completely knocked off a 5-star read, I don't know that you'll find that, but that depends on how you react to kind of cheesy YA. Last on this list, because I could not remember when I read it, so it happened somewhere in the middle. This is Infinity Sun by Adam Silvera. This comes out from Simon & Schuster on the 14th of January. This is Adam Silvera, who's a YA contemporary author. It's his first fantasy book. I don't think it reads like a fantasy book, and I'll explain why. In this world, some people have magic powers, and they're known as celestials, and other people, bad people, are stealing powers from magical creatures like phoenixes, for example, looking at the cover image, and celestials have a bit of a bad rap. And in this book, Emil and Brighton are twin brothers, and Brighton runs a YouTube channel, effectively. And Emil is kind of this shy, awkward character who's never quite living up to his brother, but Emil develops these powers out of nowhere, and it all looks a bit dodgy, and they end up actually training with the other Celestials, and Brighton uses his YouTube fame to help do the PR for the Celestials, essentially. This felt very modern to me. I liked that Adam Silvera included this kind of idea of following, of social media presence, which isn't something you always get in like modern fantasy fiction, especially in YA, despite the fact that young adults are using social media all the time, and of course some of them are YouTube famous. So it did feel like he brought that contemporary element into that world, but it read much more like a superhero story than a fantasy story. That's just a marketing thing, but it did feel like a superhero story to me. I really liked Emil as a character. I thought it was really great to have a character who was queer. Emil is gay, but to have a character where the story is not about that felt really important. I didn't really love the execution of this book. The writing wasn't really on it for me. Some of the plot elements felt a little bit thrown at me. But I think if you like Cassandra Clare's books, Mortal Instruments, yes, then you'll enjoy this. It's got that kind of feel to it. I gave Infinity Sun 3 out of 5 stars. It was a solid 3 for me. one that I would recommend to some people but not to others. That's my 14 books. That's everything I read in December. If you haven't already, you can watch my January TBR to see what I'm planning on reading then, and I will have a December haul video coming very soon because I'm going to film it right now. Comment below if you've read any of these books or if any of them pique your interest, and be sure to like and subscribe if you're already here. Why not? You already watched all the way through to here. And if you liked me, you can listen to me more by following me on all of my socials, and I will see you in the next one.